I'm really pleased to introduce our three speakers. Mark Thaler, Senior Associate at Gensler, and the lead for their education practice. So he's a leader at the Gensler architectural firm, and within that leads all their education work. So really someone who's been thinking about these questions quite a bit. His colleague Patricia Nobre, Senior Design Strategist at Gensler, and Michelle Rainey, Principal at Vinci Connect, which is a hybrid school, and you're going to be hearing a whole bunch more about that. We are really excited to have them here. We're going to be diving into some really interesting questions today, and I'm just going to say that what is the new normal going to be, and thinking about, well, what is this what is a hybrid school? I've never even heard of a hybrid school. Maybe what are we talking about? What does that mean for my school and my children's school? And how does design help us maybe think about the future in this very unprecedented time we're in? So a lot to dig into. And I just, again, I'm going to encourage everyone to continue saying hello in the chat as you are. Keep it up and throw your questions in the chat. We want this to be interactive as we can. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark. It's all yours.
Thank you so much, Roger, for that intro, and welcome everybody to our session. We are extremely excited to talk to you all today. And like many of you, when the forum went virtual. Hey, Carol. When the forum went virtual, we had to kind of take a hard right turn on what we wanted to talk to you about, because our original session was about designing a classroom and having a collaborative, roll up your sleeve, hands-on facilitated session. So what we landed on was this idea of hybrid schools, but also using some of the techniques that we use as designers, but applying it to a process, to changing education, to shifting mindset. So as we go through this, hopefully you'll be able to see and learn a little bit about how we work in shifting mindsets and working with larger groups. So today, we're going to pose our challenge. We're going to take a quick survey. You can see in the polls tab, if you could even start taking that poll now. We would like to know who's in the room. If we were live, we'd be asking for a show of hands. Then Michelle will do a deeper dive into her program, Vinci Connect, which is actually a hybrid program that had started long before any of this happened. Patricia will dive into our designer's toolkit around gaining consensus and shifting thoughts. And then really hearing from you. We have some probing questions, but really hearing from you. So with that, here's the challenge. Things are changing, and we are reading and hearing a lot of ideas around what the future is going to look like. And we like to think about things in sort of three phases. The current phase that we're in, which is this remote end of school year, but then thinking about what the return to campus might look like, but also then what is the long-term sort of optimistic and resilient way of thinking about schools, and what can we take from where we are, the silver linings, what's emerged now, but also how can we work together as a group of thinkers, as an institution, as a school. What are the ways that we can work together as communities in this moment to set the stage for the future? So with that, if I would ask you to turn to the polls and just answer some of the questions that you see here. We're really interested in sort of where you are in your mindset, and a little bit about where you're from and what you do. Those will appear in the polls tab if you can find it, and we'll keep checking on that as we go. I'm not sure how we check in on the results there, but we'll keep going. Okay, so well, without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Michelle to talk through DaVinci. And Michelle, just let me know when you're ready to move to the next slide, and I'll
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Really a pleasure and an honor to be speaking with you today. My name is Michelle Rainey. I'm the principal of DaVinci Connect, which is a hybrid program in Los Angeles. Our program is 9 years old, and it is a part of a larger network of schools. So this gives you a little bit of a snapshot of our organization. So we have 5 schools and an additional program that's now merged into the DaVinci Connect model called DaVinci Extension. 3 of those programs are brick and mortar schools, and 3 of them are hybrid schools. And at the time, years and years ago, 9 years ago for Connect, and in the 4 to 5 year range for a couple of our other programs, we didn't know how popular this model would be. And so we've learned a lot over the last 9 years, and we're still learning. Moving from even a hybrid program to a virtual program has been quite a transition, and we're learning new tools. And I like to say that we're really, kind of leaning in and embracing the challenge, and figuring out how we can add to benefit from all the things that we're learning and doing right now. So you can go ahead to the next slide. Thank you. So an overview of Connect. We started as a K-8 school, and we are now, as of really just a month ago, a TK through college program. We piloted this year a high school that is meant to merge high school and college. And then we further blended that with an existing DaVinci program called DaVinci Extension, which allows students to continue their high school education up until age 22, and take college classes through and with the support of DaVinci schools. So what we really have now is a TK through college, through bachelor's degree or transferable credit program that is a hybrid model. And what the entire TK through 12th through college spectrum has in common is hybrid learning, both on campus and remote instruction. And we believe in contextualizing learning across our organization, and it looks a little different at each of our schools with real world learning. And we have a solid belief in an application of social emotional learning to ensure that kids are really getting the best of what a school and a more tailored at home or wherever learning happens philosophy. Next slide, Mark. Thank you. Mark, you can go to, oh, thank you. So our core tenets are really that hybrid learning, social emotional learning, and real world learning work together to support the entire student. And what we're really driving towards is adulthood and career and real life skills that kids are going to need once they leave the educational setting. And a personal belief that I've spent a lot of time thinking about in the last year is that schools often focus so much on getting kids into college, but the problem isn't really getting them into college, it's getting them through college, and then even getting them through college to careers and to life skills that are going to gain them employment and keep them employed, and then also just keep them happy, passionate adults who are enjoying their life. And so those are 3 things that really drive everything we do, I think, at all of the DaVinci schools. And as a site leader, it's what I focus on for my school. Next slide. So this just represents some of the ways we bring that to life. So I've spoken about hybrid learning opportunities, having a physical space for students to come to campus and have all the best things that kids love about school. We work hard at family involvement and how to include families and empower families. I think that's really key to hybrid learning, is that parents don't feel like a visitor or kind of a passenger in their child's education. We have events where students can show what they know. So exhibitions, student-led conferences, presentations of learning, the idea that students have to really own their learning and demonstrate it in authentic ways. Tests and quizzes and essays that only a teacher will see are not authentic applications of learning. So project-based learning happens in some form in all of our schools. And sometimes it looks more like inquiry-based learning or real-world learning. But the idea is that learning is contextualized to things that adults do and value in the real world, and that kids can look to adults doing things in life, in their professions, that mirror their learning. We believe it has to be collaborative and constructivist in order for it to be relevant to real world learning. And something that's really important to a hybrid setting is that we provide parent educator support. So we hold over 300 workshops a year for our families, and we hold 4 to 5 parent educator conferences to specifically support their learning at home, whether it's curriculum or parenting philosophies and strategies, or social emotional learning, or even just to actively support the parent themselves, like mindfulness on Wednesdays or on Fridays, run by a parent at our school for other parents. And we just held a virtual parent educator conference around social emotional learning, and that was a first for us. So one of the concepts that we really challenged early on is this idea of where is school? And for so long, learning happened at school in a physical building with credentialed teachers who were the only knowledgeable source for students' learning. And so I like to share with people that more than an educator or a principal at a hybrid school, I am a parent. Both of my daughters started in our program as kindergartners. My oldest started the year that our school opened, and I knew nothing about homeschooling, about independent study, about hybrid learning. I was going to send her to our neighborhood school, and decided, I fell in love with the philosophy and with the staff, and decided, let's do this. And it's changed me as a parent, as an educator. It's changed my family. It's changed my children. So I'm always just so grateful for this school as a parent. But it really challenged me to think about the idea that school happens, learning happens everywhere. And early on, someone exposed me to the idea, so not my original thinking, that we are all our children's first educator. When they're born, they begin to learn from us all of the foundational skills that kids need when they go to school. Talking and socializing and safety and mobility and navigating complex social situations. We teach them and model this for them until they're 5 years old. And then we kind of have this flip of a switch that happens where we think that parents are no longer qualified in some way to be their child's educator, even though they were their primary and sometimes their only educator for the beginning of their life. And so thinking about that, knowing that, really helped me to better understand a hybrid learning model and to believe in parents. And I think that that's one of the challenges. Next slide, thank you. So one of the things that we've spent some time thinking about in creating a high school model is this idea that you leverage people and technology differently, and that people are leveraged to build relationships and community, and technology is used to leverage focused student learning and to increase efficiency and to drive down costs. And some of the ways that we do that is we leverage people through small cohorts of students, through the time on campus where students are exposed to a myriad of adults that don't just teach them, but also care about them as people, that we can offer personalized supports and mentoring, social emotional learning, workforce skills. One of the focus areas for our high school is financial literacy, that we can either offer ourselves or facilitate for families meetups so that students can build social networks outside of school. We really believe in helping students explore their passions and their strengths. And then we leverage technology through the curriculum. So we have partnered with Southern New Hampshire University in order to give our students a college pathway to that AA and bachelor's degree. We also partner with our local community college and UCLA Extension. And we provide students with office hour support so that they can reach out to their teachers and ask for help and learn how to be resourceful and their own advocates. And we offer both synchronous and asynchronous learning, which also helps with access and equity to the learning.
Oops, sorry, hold on one sec. Okay. There's a great question here. Sarah asks, what role can nonprofits and community-based organizations play in supporting a hybrid school model?
That is a great question. So I think there's a lot of answers to that. And one is when you're talking about real world learning and authentic learning, you want students to be able to see adults around them who not only value their learning, but do that in real life. And so there are a lot of opportunities to partner with teachers or partner with schools to be professional partners or experts in whether it's content or the real life application of learning. We leverage this as an organization through our real world learning program, and our real world learning director coordinates internships and opportunities for students to explore kind of the life after school while they're still in school and help facilitate that. So much of a child's opportunity in the adult world is networking. And we know that some kids are more heavily networked and can access opportunities than others. And so schools can start to help build those networks for students. So that's one of probably many possible answers to that question.
Great.
Thank you. So now I'm going to hand this off to Patricia, who's going to talk to you more about how might a school or a school leader think about this change in what education looks like, because it can be very scary and daunting at first.
Thank you, Michelle. It's great hearing your stories. And I think everyone here in the room touches on schools in a different way. And I think we start from the premise that there isn't one ideal school solution that we're all looking to discover, and that'll look very different for different folks. So I think what we wanted to do is share in some ways what's the toolkit that a designer brings to the table when you're faced with a problem, more holistically, more agnostically, and talk a little bit about one example of how we played that out, give you enough tools and a cadence of tools that is typically how we approach these problems, and really see how they can be useful to you as you start rediscovering and looking at what your future might look like. So with that, I think one of the big, and Mark, feel free to move through those, thanks, ways that I feel that this is the role of the designer is to really the approach that you bring, right? That it's much less about this idea that I hold the knowledge and I am bringing the knowledge and the design to a set of users. And over we found that I think Scott Page said it really well in this quote here, that it's when you're able to include those diverse perspectives, the folks that have had very different lived experiences, and bring those into the table, that's when you get to a design, with what we're doing, that will be much more innovative, much more accurate in terms of future proofing, and much more able to really resist standard time. And I think sometimes clients come back to us and say, well, how did you know that? How did you think of that? We're like, well, we didn't think of it. You all thought of it. And that role of engaging the vast spectrum of users in the design process has really been key. So I think it starts off, if you go on to the next slide, really about a shift in mindset. And I think without that, you're kind of doomed to fail before you even hit go. So really that idea that when we're engaging with users and when we're having these conversations around what does the future look like, it's less about looking for the right answer, but making sure that you're looking for the right questions. Are the folks asking the right questions in the space? Moving away from this idea that I already have some knowledge and I'm looking to reinforce what we know. And I think that's something that's really, it's easier said than done, but really embracing this idea that only that other person can tell you what life looks like from over there. And if you don't stop to listen, you'll never know. And ultimately, I have this idea that we're not looking for one solution. It's not about one trajectory. It's about multiple trajectories. It's about multiple solutions. And with that mindset, I think the natural consequence of that onto the next slide is this idea that it's a different reason why you're designing. You're no longer designing to find this optimum solution, this one universal thorough path where people will learn or that will inspire all. But really this idea that you're moving away from, and that it's iterative, that it's a process, that you're not looking for success or failure of a design, that you're looking for the idea that it will continuously evolve. And that it becomes much more about this process of engaging folks, redesigning, recreating. I like the question that Aaron put here before when Michelle said, you know, where is school? And Aaron kind of asked, well, that makes me think, what is school? And allow for that to be a process that you have multiple voices being part of that conversation. How do you do that effectively? And moving, I think, away from this idea that you learn, you go to school, then you leave, and then you go to work. Right, and then you do, but that it is a continuous process of learning by doing. And I think as leaderships and as ways that as we're facilitating this process, there's this tendency of saying, okay, I'm the expert. You know, I think even as we got onto this call, it says, okay, so that you're going to go and you're going to talk to these folks about. I'm like, well, that you're less a conveyor of knowledge, but more an enabler of experience, that you're enabling the conversation. You're enabling the platform for those conversations to exist versus bringing the content of that platform. So with that shift in mindset, I want to quickly go through, I think, a little bit of an arsenal of a toolkit that has been really helpful to us in saying, okay, I get it. I want to listen to folks. I want to see what different perspectives there are. How do I do that? And I think in sometimes really understanding that you do need multiple pathways to engage multiple voices, that there isn't that one pathway will always privilege certain voices. And understanding that and understanding that that's a natural intricacy aspect of the toolkit allows us to be much more engaging and hit a broader range. So I think one of the big tools that we bring to this idea to the table is this the vision session, right? So this is really about getting everybody in the room and telling us, you know, what's the challenge? What are we looking to understand? What does success look like for you? And oftentimes I feel like when we're engaging with folks, they feel like, oh, the architects are coming into the space. So let's bring everyone to the room and we're going to tell the architects what we really need and what the vision for the space is, what our problems are, and they're going to solve it for us. And every time, the biggest value is not for us to hear it, but it's for folks to hear from among each other. You bring folks into the room and say, you think that's the problem that we have? That's not what I saw about with them at all. And that exchange of really understanding and people being able to hear from each other, I think is the biggest value here versus being able to at the end come and say, so what is it that we're ultimately trying to challenge? And more often than not, we see a shift from perhaps we were originally even brought into the space to look to solve, and what we leave this session saying, oh, so this is what we're actually looking to solve. So having that opportunity to have the big quorum and have everybody in the space. But what also happens, and just move on to the next slide, I think a lot of the things, how do we do that now, right? In these times, how do you bring everyone into a space? What does that look like? And sometimes it feels daunting and it feels, we can't. I guess we're going to have to wait. We'll do it in the fall. Maybe we'll do it next year. And that would, at the end of the opportunity is now, the rethinking needs to happen now. So, and a lot of what we found is there are multiple platforms out there. Miro is the one that we have used a lot. It's a free platform you can use online, and it looks very much like Post-its and paper on the wall. But quite honestly, it could be a PowerPoint. It could be a screen share where you have some text boxes and you just write down what folks are saying and everybody's seeing it. I think the value is that you're seeing the thoughts being captured and there's a materialization of it. So I think sometimes we get caught up on what the toolkit is, and we're going to say, even in this session, like, oh, the architects are going to tell us the toolkit. Like, the toolkit is more of an approach. I think it's like, let's hear big, let's hear medium, let's hear small. I think that is a valid piece. How you do it and the toolkits that do that, I think it varies a lot. We have found, I think, if anything to say about the tool, that sometimes beautiful makes a difference, I would say. Seeing all the words show up in a Word document is just less compelling than seeing them show up in colorful text boxes in a PowerPoint. So I think we've found that having things have an aesthetic to them in some way does help engage and keep folks interested in looking and reading it and being, oh yeah, but see that thing, I disagree with that, and helps that engagement, if anything is to be said about the tool. So the thing with the vision session and all the values that it brings, it doesn't allow for all voices to be part of the conversation in the same way. The whisperers often go by unheard. The folk who just maybe weren't even invited to the room often go by unheard. And so over and over, we've seen the value of smaller groups. Sometimes they're called focus groups, unfocused groups, whatever they're called. And I think sometimes there's a very traditional way of thinking of these groups. We're going to bring the teachers, then we're going to bring the staff, then we're going to bring the 6th graders, then the 7th graders, and then the 8th graders. And oftentimes that's a valid way of bucketing folks. But there's always an issue when you bucket folks, right? I think there's an intrinsic problem to that. So I think the challenge I would leave, I think when thinking of smaller groups, I think what we've tried to explore sometimes is what are the axes that will make the biggest difference in solving this challenge? Sometimes what we've done is said, you know, do you identify more being an introvert or extrovert for a range of students? Let's bring you into the room and have, what's that experience like? And what is that? And that was a specific design challenge around how do you design for a range of users, which range. So thinking, I think just the challenging, like when we're thinking of groups, thinking of what are ways that we can look at that in a way that's meaningful to the challenge. And a lot of what this brings to light is the very different lived experience of different groups. It allows for us to look at those same things that came out of that vision session and that same challenge in a more nuanced way. And a lot of the value, I think, again, is that continuous dialogue. So in the same way that everybody heard each other there, for folks to be able to say, oh, and be able to in some way see what comes out and what's the output of these very small groups. And then again, in the next slide, how do we do this digitally? I think it's the same toolkit, quite frankly. Miro boards work again. It's a Google Docs, it's a PowerPoint. It can be very, very simple. But again, the value is having something concrete and that you can look at and say, oh, let's compare. This is what this group said. This group said something different, and it allows for you to have something tangible that results from that process and continues and fosters that continuous dialogue. And then I think ultimately in that scale of big, medium, small is that how do you capture the individual perspective? And the interesting thing with the individual perspective is that it allows you both to give a voice to each individual, but also to see the data as an aggregate. And sometimes as you're looking at number of users and how do you involve every voice and how are you able to look at that has been a very powerful tool. So I think specifically now we've been working a lot around a tool that just helps us understand what the learning from home experience has been like for different folks in different countries, and the input and being able to hear this and be able to look at that from a data perspective is often a great tool. I think surveys can happen in a very basic way. It's in the polling here. Just kind of starts telling us, where folks are at, where folks are coming from, that, 40% of us are feeling hopeful. And it helps guide our conversation as we engage with you and saying, well, it's not a group that's despairing, 0% put despairing. So, and it helps make sure that conversation is responsive to where folks are at an aggregate level that's responding to the individual piece. And then ultimately, I think the last tool I wanted to talk about is that not everything can be said in words. So we've found that sometimes there's just some aspects around relationships among folks, among players, and this could be spatial or not. We've once asked different folks to diagram what their school ecosystem, what the dynamics between groups were. And it was very interesting to see leadership draw lots of circles and students start to draw lots of triangles and say, well, what are we looking at? Are we more of a circle or are we more of a triangle? And what is that? And those things are so oftentimes hard to explain and verbalize. So I think sometimes there's just value in allowing folks to say, can you model this for us? Can you do a drawing? And a lot of things come out through that process as well, and also allows for you to create this collage. I think it's not going to tell every story, but it tells enough of a story and a patchwork that allows you to give a perception of realities and how things are being lived and experienced.
Hey,
So,
Patricia,
yep.
Roger asks an interesting question. How do you engage? The schools have so many stakeholders in their communities. So how do you engage an entire community from, the inboard all the way to those people like parents, and there's a question about nonprofits, people who are engaged in the orbits of all of these schools,
Yep.
because they exist as ecosystems. Can we talk a little bit about that? And then we'll go
Absolutely.
on
And I
to the
think
example.
great question. And I think that is oftentimes a challenge. It feels daunting, right? If you have a school with 10 teachers and it's a small context, you feel like, oh yeah, we can talk to everyone. Let's get everyone in a room. You can't get everyone in a room depending on context. And I think a lot of it comes down to this toolkit that I think of it as like the large, medium, small piece. And what are ways that you can make sure that everybody has a voice in the space that feels the most pertinent to them. So, and a lot of it, I think, is also about being part of the conversation. Folks want to speak, but they also really want to listen. They want to listen more than you'd think. So having a way that you can be constantly sharing out what you've been hearing brings ownership and engagement into a conversation that you may not necessarily have been at every focus group. So I think finding ways of engaging in continuous dialogue has been ways where we have different avenues of allowing folks to come in. There might be surveys, there might be different, but having a mechanism of always reporting back what you're hearing, and a mechanism for folks to respond to that, I think has consistently allowed for different stakeholders and sometimes surprising voices. Sometimes someone you didn't even really know cared so much about this thing. You didn't think of inviting them to the cafeteria workshop.
Yeah. And I think it's fair to say too that it's a kind of a process that builds on itself. So, we certainly don't come into the process with a full knowledge of the issues that need to be uncovered. They have to be uncovered and discovered, and then brought to the group, brought to the next group. And that's the fascinating part of it, at the sort of organic nature of it.
Yeah.
If I could speak for a second to what that also looks like in schools. So for me, it also looks like accessibility, and even things like the placement of the principal's office or of any one person's space. So often in schools, principals or school leaders are hard to get to intentionally. They have layers of like filter to get to them and to keep people from distracting them. And I have always insisted that my office have a direct door to the outside. So it's in a hallway where people walking by can come right in, or right in the main office, close to the front door. Anyone walking through, in or out of the school, can see me with my door open and access me. Is that the most efficient way to run a school? No. But do I get constant feedback? And do people feel comfortable approaching me with their ideas, suggestions, wants, needs? Absolutely. And so that shift in mindset, I mean, that's something I learned at Da Vinci. It's not something that I learned from my own education growing up or in a teacher ed program or anything like that. But that psychological aspect to how to be responsive and hear voices is really important.
Yeah, agreed, Michelle. I think that's a great point. And it's also, I think, I have an understanding that welcoming might look very different for different folks, depending on their past lived experiences and past societal and structural aspects of it as well. So that oftentimes you kind of need to be able, you won't know that something isn't welcoming. We've designed welcome desks in spaces to then later hear feedback that felt very unwelcoming that felt so finding ways, I think, to have those voices be part of it is a specific challenge to each of the institutions, but looking what are the voices that we're missing, what are the voices that haven't been part of the conversation, and having that as a constant question throughout the process can maybe give a peek into some of those missing gaps, right?
Yeah, and there's definitely a lot of, just peering back at some of these questions and comments, there's definitely a lot of thinking and reacting around this idea of the unheard voices, the quieter voices, and perhaps even those voices that aren't looking at it in a positive light, but are looking at it, from a perspective of perhaps not having a great experience.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm loving this conversation. I almost don't want to spend too much time going through this. So I'm going to go pretty quickly through an afternoon that Mark and I experienced like 5 years ago now, but with a similar aspect in terms of bringing together educators and designers and saying, like, well, how can we learn from each other? And I think that was similar piece here, and run a little bit how we brought these various tools that I just mentioned together into one afternoon, and what that looks like. What's the cadence of those things look like? So it's less of a piecemeal thing of there's all these tools. How do they inform each other, and how do they leverage each other? So pretty quickly, we started big, level setting, mind setting, saying this is what we're looking to do. And I think sometimes just stating where you're coming from as it began, like this is what we're asking, this is what we're trying to set, kind of set the stage for the conversation. Then we went to small groups and said, so within each of these, we'd given them a number of cards and saying words and said, what are the essential behaviors that you're looking to, this was a challenge specific here, but gave them a certain question around what are the essential behaviors that will drive innovation. Behavioral cards, words, and allowed folks to really work together in group. And in these groups, folks were coming from different institutions and shared that experience at that level. Then we share out again. So all the groups kind of put their words out there, and you're able to see what came out of the small groups and be able to share that. So I think a big piece of the small group is then being able, it's that share out look like, and here it's physical, here it's on a board. I think it can look very different, but the concept of then being and finding something that you can react to. And actually, and then people really started putting red dots on the things that really resonated the most with them. And you could really start visually seeing where folks were congregating around what are ideas that were resonating, and allowing for that to really start capturing some of those reactions. And then on to the next one, and then distill down to say, what is it about these images that really are inspirational? What are the things you want to get from here? And what are the specific spaces and solutions that were resonating with different folks? And then we brought it even smaller. And then we said we made it really personal. So all these folks were coming in from different institutions and said, okay, so we've had this conversation. We're having a conversation about what inspired you. We've seen what inspired each other. What is that actionable thing that you're going to bring home to your institution? And each one just got an 8x8 cardboard box and started drawing or sketching or writing. What was the thing that they were going to take away as the catalyst of change, as based on all these conversations we've had? And then again, it became about sharing and seeing that as an aggregate, and really allowed us to. So we created this board, it's basically a pegboard, and started clustering these different boxes by themes, and it became this artifact that really allowed us to again see the individual, but also see the aggregate and see what were lone ideas, what were ideas where everyone was kind of bringing together, and looking through them onto the next slide as well, and really allowing for this to be this aspect to start fostering a dialogue. And then you really start seeing what were the common themes that folks were resonating, saying, what was the one thing I'm going to bring back to my institution? And whether it be more strategic and more spatial, or just be more about listening in different ways and teaching in different ways and rethinking the concept of teaching and more conceptual. And I think the piece that we wanted to highlight here was really this idea of creating something that exists that allows folks to continue to react to and allows for the dialogue to continue to exist in less of a question answer format, but more in you see something and you're able to react to it and continue that conversation in different ways. And I think big piece for us is this idea that the job is never done, right? When you figured it out, when you think, okay, we got it, we heard, and so many voices, we came to this thing, we're going to build it, we're going to live it. And then it's a process of rediscovering. And I think having that mindset from the beginning, that's it, that's the beauty of it. And then you listen again and you say, did this work? Did this not? And I think allows for it to be more playful, more fun, and just more engaging and say, well, we're just trying. Let's try this out. Let's see if it worked. Oh, it didn't work. Let's try something different. And it's a different approach to reinventing the future. That's less about trying to get a crystal ball and saying, what's the future hold? But saying, let's do this together and shift the mindset of what designing and what the role of the designer is. So I think with that, I would love to kind of I'm anxious to kind of go back to hear your thoughts and have that conversation and kind of go back to a little bit of that dialogue.
So yeah, and we have this up, and it's what's really interesting is we pre-populated the slide, but as we have been listening and I've been reading the chat and seeing what's on all of your mind, a lot of these things are top of mind for you as well. So I don't know, Michelle, if you have any just closing insights, closing questions, and then we'd love to start more of a dialogue with you all.
Yeah. Thank you. So, I mean, I guess as you could imagine, knowing that I run a hybrid school, we've been turned to by several local schools, kind of wanting to know, like, what do we do? And I have to tell you, the answer is I don't know yet. And it's the mindset piece. And what I've told people from the beginning is, the way that we will be successful with all that's going to come in education and in response to our current situation, it has to do with mindset. Are you going to lean into this and embrace what you're going to learn from it, and embrace that this is the thing, the really big thing that it's going to take to change education? Or are you going to resist that and prepare as quickly as you can to return to normal, even knowing that normal is probably not the previous normal? And one of the things that I think Da Vinci does really well and positions our students and our families and our staff to do well is be agile in any kind of situation. The fail fast, learn fast, improve fast, to really embrace. And this is why this time feels scary for educators, that we know that it is likely that we may not know until July what August will look like, and that probably August and September are going to look different than October, November, December, and that second semester is going to look different than first semester, and the following fall is probably going to look different. And at any given time, some trigger can send us to a complete pivot again. And that's scary because these are big systems to put in place, and a lot of people's big feelings and experiences and emotions and fears. And so the mindset piece is really key, and also really hard. And so these are just some questions that we've already started to think about, and I've skimmed through the chat, and you're asking equally good questions. So let's talk about it.
I think, and I think one thing I want to share about our organization, we're an organization that was also very much geared towards. We never really thought of ourselves as a remote organization yet, or as a hybrid organization. Yet, when COVID hit and we went into our remote working platform, what we realized was that we are in fact hybrid, because we as an international organization are so well connected with each other across these virtual platforms that going from in-person collaboration to virtual collaboration, and then flying and meeting each other in person, and then again collaborating virtually, it made us realize that that we were hybrid without even knowing it. And so I think as we you in your specific organizations and we in our organizations, it's we're really starting to think about what that now is really the time to think about the future and to think forward about how to take what we're learning here about ourselves, looking in the mirror a little bit and engaging outside people into our conversation. So that's sort of the message that we wanted to bring here, which is and I love that 40% of us were hopeful. And I do hope that there's some optimism here and that we can answer some questions and hopefully give you some takeaways that you can go back and use productively. So here's a question from Scott. Does hybrid mean sitting in front of a computer at home or in a school? Does it mean a flipped classroom? Does it look more like homeschool or cyber school layered with more PBL?
So I think every school might answer that differently. And I think the purpose of school choice is to provide as broad an array of school options as possible because every student is different. And I think there are some fundamental problems when we say every student is different, learns differently, we need to be responsive to all schools, but we need to build schools the same. And so the more options that kids can have, the more likely every child is going to find the thing that doesn't just work for them, but that also stretches them. And I don't advocate finding the thing that works already for kids. We need to also find the things that stretch them, which is a beautiful part of a hybrid program. We have some kids who their greatest growth is social, and learning is not the problem. And for other kids, it's the opposite. We intentionally describe ourselves as hybrid with on-campus learning and remote learning. And so we have kind of backed away from virtual or online, and there's so many different descriptors, but we have families who are intentionally using the least amount of technology possible, and some who use technology quite excessively. And there's a time and a place for everything. And I think part of our role is to kind of help lead thoughtful conversations about those things. And some schools gravitate towards a lot of technology devices for every student or device use as early as possible, and some really gravitate towards pushing that off as late as possible. And I think everything has a time and its place, and it just needs to be used intentionally, not technology for technology's sake, but because technology is the very best tool at that time, or people is the very best tool, or a pen and pencil is and paper is the very best tool. And so just being really thoughtful and strategic about what is the outcome for that learning, and then what is the setting, the tool, the human that's going to make the most sense to serve that need. And I want to say that I don't know all the answers. I strive to run a responsive school, responsive to kids, responsive to families, and also responsive to passionate, autonomous educators that want to do their very best work every single day. But I aim to be those things. I don't claim to already be those things. And I'm here to learn as much as anyone else from even the content within this session. And I'm taking furious notes about things that it's making me think more about for the future.
I'm seeing also lots of questions around the different virtual platforms. I don't, we certainly from our perspective, because we are speaking to multiple institutions, we're using all of them. Hopin is actually this is the first time we've tried Hopin as a virtual tool, but as an education tool, I don't know if Michelle, if you have any thoughts about that, but certainly it seems to be a burning question.
Yeah, so one of the hardest parts of our program as a parent, and we get this feedback from parents, and it's also for some parents the thing they appreciate and love the most about us, is that we are constantly trying new things. And some things stick for a very long time, and some things are like out the window the next year, even though some people have just gotten comfortable with it. Because if it's not the right tool, we don't hang on to it. And so that is everything from how we do the independent study paperwork, tracking student progress and attendance and work samples and things like that, to the digital or non-digital curriculum that students use for their at-home learning versus their at-school learning. Our teachers primarily create content for the classes that they teach, not exclusively, but we really want educators who feel so passionately interested in their curriculum that they want to be designers of the curriculum. That doesn't mean that we don't provide them with curriculum or tools, because we don't want them to reinvent the wheel either. But we give teachers a lot of autonomy to decide what that looks like, and sometimes it's too much autonomy. And I think that that's one of the things we've learned since COVID, is the autonomy is really great, except when it is too hard for parents to navigate, when any additional stressors are added. And so we just had a conversation about equity and about kind of how our program has shifted and the learnings we've had in our last staff meeting. And the staff really came together and said, I think we need to streamline next year and all kind of get on board with a theme that we all explore in order to make things easier for students and families in the fall. And it was an amazing conversation because it came from them and them looking out for families, not from me and some other principals in a room thinking about what we think our families, our students, or our staff needs. And so, back to what Patricia was saying about like really bringing the voices into the room, leaning into those conversations. But the tools that we use, every tool you can imagine, it's more what sticks. We're willing to try anything and everything.
I love this. Here's a question. It's actually more of a statement from Scott. Unique and difference is great, and I love the concept, but schools that look the same or structured the same are scalable with predictable outcomes across a region or state. So therein lies the rub, I think, Michelle, right? I mean, certainly for us as designers as well.
Yeah, and I am like not the model for that. Da Vinci Schools is an amazing place to be and work, and is so responsive to kids. And it is kind of the running joke right now that we have taken very literally the like laboratory aspect of charter schools, being responsive to needs and then creating solutions. Every one of our schools is completely different and serves kids in completely different ways. And we do not hone in on the solution and then replicate and scale it. But what we do is we find ways to share that with others. And so the Da Vinci Institute is another arm of our organization where we specifically create workshops and conference and content and invite visitors to our campus or campuses to learn from us. We're extremely open source because we're not trying to be the one solution. We're trying to be open source about the mindset and about solutions so that people can take what works, just like we've done. We've just begged, borrowed, and stolen our way through all the best practices that make our schools work. And that's what schools should be: collaborative environments where you share what works, and also what didn't work and why it didn't work and how it might work better for someone else.
Yeah, I think this question also, gets to the heart of the matter of the third rail of assessment and measuring success and scalability. And you know, at some level, it perhaps that one of the things that this maybe a silver lining of all of this might be that although it's hard to imagine, but that the way you assess schools and the way that you assess successful outcomes is different on the out on you know on the downside of all of this, you know, on the backside of all of this.
Absolutely.
See if there's some other questions. So we have about 4 minutes left. Are there any other burning questions? I think, you know, I have a question for everyone else. Maybe you could just start typing some responses. What's your next move? What are you going to do next? This is Team Hopeful. So what is Team Hopeful going to do now? Love to hear from you. Roger says, and 20% optimistic.
I'm noticing Scott's question about the structure of schools being an 8 to 3. Yeah, kids don't so much of it's interesting to look at how much of time that kids spend are kind of just filling time. And schools definitely serve a child care service to society that may never go away. But I think more and more families have discovered that they may not need that 35 hours a week. And it's certainly not what their kids need in order to complete their learning. I also noticed earlier a comment by AC Bird about like diversity and credentialing. And if you look at the shifting statistics about homeschoolers and students, families who engage in independent study over the last 10 years, even pre-COVID, how much that's shifted regardless of income level, educational level of parents, and even first language spoken in the home. Homeschooling is being embraced by shifting populations. It's no longer what like white middle class people do around the dining room table with their 8 kids wearing matching polos. I think that's the myth and the stereotype of homeschooling that has shifted a lot. And some more recent polling has shown particularly African American and Asian populations leaning into the idea of homeschooling in huge numbers compared to in the past.
So I think it's fair to say that we're at a period of great disruption, and you know, I just want to thank everyone who's been on this panel, you know, the panelists, but especially all of you who've been just flooding the chat box. There's so many questions I see that we haven't had time to get to, but we're grateful for your enthusiasm, and you know, hopefully in the networking and in some of the other sessions, you can bring some of that thinking and share around and bring it back to your institutions. And we're grateful for your time and grateful for your attendance. So thanks, everybody.